I never thought 3 years of silence could hurt this much. My name is Emily. I'm 25, and for the last 3 years, I've been married to William Anderson, the most powerful, most sought after millionaire CEO in Los Angeles. And yet, to him, I might as well have been invisible. In 3 years of marriage, we exchanged fewer than 50 words. 50 words. Can you imagine? I stopped counting after the first year because every time I tried, the number made my chest ache. It wasn't a marriage built on love or even companionship. It was an arrangement. My family needed money, and the Anderson family needed William to appear respectable, grounded. He was the perfect businessman, but too cold, too untouchable in the eyes of society. And so they gave him me, a wife who was expected to smile when needed, disappear when not, and ask for nothing in return. I accepted because I thought I had no choice. My parents' debts, their future, my family's survival, it all rested on me signing away my own happiness. Most mornings I woke up early before the house stirred and crept downstairs to the kitchen. I had 15 minutes to eat something before he came down at 6:15 sharp for his perfectly timed breakfast. That was our routine. He would arrive, I would vanish. It was like being a ghost in my own home, a shadow drifting silently down marble hallways. No one cared to notice. But one morning, everything shifted. I still remember the sound of his shoes against the staircase earlier than expected, and how my heart leapt into my throat. I stood quickly ready to flee when his voice cut through the silence. Emily. It had been months since I'd heard my own name from his lips. Cold, sharp-clipped, but still my name. I froze in the doorway, trembling, and turned. He was standing there, immaculate as always, his blue eyes piercing me in a way I wasn't prepared for. "Do you have something suitable to wear to a corporate event?" His tone was flat, businesslike, as though I were his assistant rather than his wife. For a moment I thought I misheard him. In 3 years he had never once invited me anywhere. Not to dinners, not to parties, not even to family gatherings. I was his wife, only on paper, hidden away like a shameful secret. What I asked, my voice shaking. He adjusted his cufflinks without looking at me. "It's a simple question. Do you own a dress appropriate to accompany the CEO of Anderson Enterprises to a gala dinner?" My heart raced. Why are you asking me that? His eyes flickered across me with the barest hint of recognition. And for one split second, I felt like he was really seeing me for the first time. Then it was gone. "Because you're coming with me tomorrow night, 7 o'clock. I couldn't believe it. "But why, you've never—" "Business reasons," he cut in, his voice as cold as steel. "I need to appear as a stable family man. You are my wife, at least on paper." The words sliced through me like knives, but I held my head high even as shame burned my cheeks. "And if I don't want to go—" He looked almost surprised, raising an eyebrow as though my resistance was unthinkable. "That's not an option, Emily. It's your duty." I repeated the word under my breath. Duty. Like everything else in my life, right? A duty to my family, a duty to his name, a duty to this hollow, suffocating silence we called a marriage. For a fleeting second, I thought I saw something flicker across his face. Regret, maybe, but it vanished before I could be sure. I forced myself to look him straight in the eye. "Fine. I'll go. But not because it's my duty. I'll go because after 3 years of being invisible, I want to see this world you've chosen over me." I brushed past him, my head held higher than my heart felt, and left him standing there in the kitchen. For the first time in years, I felt like I had taken back a small piece of myself. That night, as I stared at my reflection in the mirror, I realized tomorrow would change everything. For the first time since I married William Anderson, the world would see me. I didn't know whether to be terrified or hopeful, maybe both. Downstairs, William lingered in the kitchen longer than usual. And though I didn't know it then, he was seeing me differently too. For 3 years I was nothing but background noise, and now something in his carefully built wall of indifference had cracked. But cracks in walls can be dangerous, because once they appear, the whole structure starts to tremble. And I had no idea that night was only the beginning of a storm that would tear open secrets, shatter illusions, and force us both to face the truth we had been running from for years. The next day unfolded like a dream wrapped in dread. From the moment I woke, I could feel a strange energy pulsing through the house, as if every wall knew something was about to shift. I spent hours staring at my wardrobe, which was pitiful compared to the gowns and jewels I imagined women in William's world wore. At last, I chose a simple navy dress that had been hanging untouched since our wedding. My mother had bought it for me, insisting I would one day need to look like a wife worthy of a millionaire. I never thought I would actually wear it. When the clock struck 7, I descended the staircase with trembling hands. William was waiting at the bottom, adjusting his cufflinks, a black tuxedo molding, to his tall frame. For a moment, he looked up at me and paused. Just a pause, but it was the first time in 3 years I saw his eyes soften even slightly. My breath caught. Then, as quickly as it came, the softness was gone, replaced with the cold mask he always wore. "We'll be late," he said, offering his arm without emotion. The gala was held in one of Los Angeles' most opulent hotels. Crystal chandeliers spilled light across a sea of diamonds, laughter, and whispered deals. As William led me through the crowd, heads turned, eyes widened, whispers erupted like sparks. "Is that his wife? I thought she didn't exist." 3 years and no one's seen her. Their words were daggers dressed as curiosity, but I kept my chin high, clutching William's arm like armor. Introductions blurred into each other. William spoke about mergers, investments, numbers. I stood silently at his side, smiling politely, every word reminding me I was just a prop in his carefully staged theater. But then came the moment that changed everything. His uncle Gregory Anderson, a man whose gaze was sharp enough to slice steel, approached with a glass of champagne in hand. He looked at me as though I were an insect crawling across the tablecloth. "So, this is the mysterious wife," he sneered. "I was beginning to think you were a myth, William. A convenient story." Laughter rippled through the circle of men around him. My face burned, but before I could retreat, something in me snapped. 3 years of silence, of invisibility, of humiliation surged to the surface. I straightened my back and looked Gregory square in the eyes. "My name is Emily," I said firmly, "and I assure you I'm very real." The room stilled. A hush spread, and even William seemed taken aback. Gregory smirked, raising his glass. "Well, perhaps she does have a tongue after all." William's jaw clenched, his hand tightening around mine. "Enough, uncle," he said sharply, his voice colder than I'd ever heard. The crowd shifted, uncomfortably unused to seeing the usually unflappable William lose his composure. For the rest of the night, I felt his grip on me change. It wasn't just for show anymore, it was protective, almost possessive. He guided me through the crowd, no longer treating me like a shadow, but as though my presence mattered. When we finally sat at our table, his gaze lingered on me. "You handled him well," he said quietly. I wanted to laugh. "Handled him, he humiliated me." William's eyes darkened. "Gregory humiliates everyone, but you didn't let him win." The words hung between us, heavy with meaning. For the first time, I felt a crack in his armor, a glimpse of the man behind the ice. But the night wasn't done unraveling. As the evening drew to a close, I slipped away to the restroom to collect myself. On the way back, I passed an open doorway and froze. Inside, William stood with Gregory, their voices low but heated. "You think parading her around will make you look like a man?" William Gregory sneered. "You've always been weak, just like your father. This company is mine and no pretty little wife will save you." My stomach twisted. I pressed a hand to my mouth to stifle a gasp. William's reply was quiet but lethal. "Touch her again with your words and you'll regret it." I hurried back to the ballroom before I was caught, my heart pounding. Something far deeper than I understood was at play here: family rivalries, long-buried wounds, secrets that stretched beyond our hollow marriage. For the first time, I realized William's silence wasn't just cruelty, it was armor. And somewhere behind it, he was fighting battles I couldn't yet see. That night in the car ride home, we sat in silence. But it was a different silence, charged, alive, full of questions neither of us dared to ask. When we arrived at the mansion, I moved to step out, but his hand caught mine. For a long moment, he simply held it, his gaze searching mine with something like longing, or maybe fear. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "Things are not as they seem, Emily." I wanted to demand answers, to tear down the wall he had built between us, but all I could do was nod. Because for the first time in 3 years I believed him. And I knew deep in my bones that our story was only just beginning. The morning after the gala, the mansion felt different, like the air had shifted a few degrees colder, and every portrait watched me pass with new, curious eyes. I made tea in the quiet kitchen, the way I always did, the clink of porcelain steadying my hands. 3 years of being a ghost had taught me to move without being seen, but last night had ripped me out of hiding. Every whisper at the gala seemed to be following me home. Is that his wife? I thought she was a rumor. I wanted to crawl back into the shell I'd built, but something stubborn and newly alive inside me refused. William didn't come down at 6:15. The clock ticked past 7, then 8. I carried the tray upstairs and paused outside his office. The door, usually sealed like a vault, was ajar. He sat behind the desk, jacket off, tie loose, the night's polish scrubbed from his face. For the first time he looked his age, 32, and somehow much older. Papers lay scattered like fallen leaves. He rubbed the bridge of his nose and only noticed me when I set the cup down. "Thank you," he said, voice rough. A pause. "About last night." "You don't owe me an explanation," I said automatically, a reflex carved by years of silence. But I wanted one. God, I wanted one so badly I tasted copper in my mouth. He studied me, then exhaled like a man surrendering to gravity. "My uncle was my father's executioner," he said quietly. "Not with a gun, with patience, with contracts. He bled the company dry behind smiling toasts and made me the convenient shield. He thinks I'm a winter train to outlast storms, not someone who carries them." It was the most honest thing he'd ever said to me. The cup warmed my palms, my chest went tight, and I asked, my voice small, "What am I in that winter?" His eyes lifted to mine. There was something raw there I didn't recognize. "You're the only thing that ever felt like spring." I almost laughed, bitter, disbelieving, but his face held. His sincerity frightened me more than his coldness ever had. I stepped back. Why marry me and then erase me? The muscle in his jaw jumped. He looked toward the window, sunlight painting his profile in thin gold. "Because the moment they knew you mattered, they'd use you. My mother thought invisibility would keep you safe until I could pry the company from Greg's hands." He swallowed hard. "And I thought I could live with that sacrifice, your presence, to keep you from becoming a target. I was wrong." The words sliced me in two, one half softened by the way he said mattered, the other half blistering at the cost of that protection. "You could have told me," I whispered. "You could have trusted me to choose how to carry it." Silence pressed between us, full of all the nights we hadn't spoken. He nodded once, almost a bow. "You're right." He asked if I would walk with him that evening to his father's study, a place I'd never been. I agreed because curiosity beat louder than caution, and because the new reckless pulse in me wanted to see what else the world was hiding behind locked doors. By dusk, the house was bones and shadows. We passed the formal library and turned down a hallway I had never cleaned. It smelled faintly of cedar and old paper. He unlocked a frosted door at the end and clicked on a single desk lamp. The room was modest, almost tender, books worn by real hands, a leather chair with a threadbare arm, and on the far wall, a painting I'd seen in glossy magazines, a storm over a dark sea. He opened a hidden panel behind the painting and drew out a wooden box. Inside were letters bound with navy ribbon, some yellowed, some stained at the folds. He put the first bundle in my hands. "My mother wrote these, to me, to you." "To me," my voice cracked. He nodded. "She died the month we married. She was the only person who believed I could be different from my uncle. She knew about your family's debt, the way Greg arranged to swallow your father's small business and trap him in repayment until he broke. She was the one who saw you at the bank the day you begged for an extension. She found you worthy long before I did." The humiliation of that memory, standing under harsh fluorescent lights while a clerk counted my father's life in missed payments, rose in my throat like smoke. My fingers shook as I untied the ribbon. The first letter was dated the week before our wedding. "Emily," it began in a neat, careful hand. "Forgive me for asking you to step into a storm. I chose you because I saw steel under your gentleness. I begged my son to keep you hidden, not because I wanted you small, but because we needed time to cut the wires my brother-in-law wrapped around our throats. If he ever belittles, you know that I failed to teach him tenderness, not that you lack worth. The room blurred. My tears fell onto the paper, leaving darker moons. She wanted me invisible, I managed. But she also wanted me seen. William's voice was a rasp. She wanted you alive. I turned the next letter. This one held a thin photograph my father shaking hands with a younger Gregory, both smiling without their eyes. The caption on the back was written in the same steady hand 2 days before the accident. I felt the floor tilt. My father's car had gone off a service road after a meeting I never understood. The police had called it weather. Our town had called it bad luck. But my mother had whispered betrayal until her voice wore out. Was it him? I asked, words brittle as sugar glass. I can't prove he cut the brakes, William answered, and there was an animal wound in his tone. But I can prove he pushed your father into a corner that became a cliff. He's been baiting margins with people's lives for 20 years. He did it to mine. He did it to yours. A heat rose in me I didn't recognize, older than our marriage, older than my shame. Grief uncoiled and turned into something sharper. Then why wait 3 years? Why play polite while he keeps swallowing people whole? Because I didn't know where all the tunnels ran, William said. Because I was afraid of losing everything before I had anything to build with. Because I mistook control for safety. He closed his eyes. And because I am a coward in ways you are not. I didn't know what to do with that confession, how to hold a man who was both fortress and fracture. I reached for another letter. The parchment crackled. If you are reading this without me, his mother wrote, trust the woman I chose for you. She will tell the truth even when you cannot. She will cut the right rope when your hands shake. Do not teach her to disappear. She was not made for vanishing. Something inside me stood up. The last 3 years had taught me supplication. These letters taught me how to stand. I wiped my face and lifted my chin. If Gregory crushed my father, then this is not just your war, it's mine. A shadow flickered across the frosted glass. William stiffened. We heard a soft click, the whisper of a camera, then feet retreating down the hall. We weren't alone. He killed the lamp with a snap, and the room plunged into a thin gray. He's watching the doors, William murmured. He's always watching. Adrenaline sharpened my vision. Then let him watch us walk through one. I tucked the letters into the wooden box, slid it back into the wall, and turned to him. If he uses visibility as a weapon, we'll make it our shield. He hid for 20 years. We will not. I expected him to argue. He didn't. He only moved closer, the line of his body a question. In the half-light, he reached for my hand. Not like a claim, not like duty, but like a vow. I was wrong to call you a paper wife, he said. I see you now. If you'll let me, I'll stand where I should have from the start, beside you, not before you. I let our fingers lace. Heat flushed my cheeks, not from embarrassment, but from the sudden fierce knowledge that I had been practicing for this moment for 3 years, training my silence into a blade. Then we start with the truth, I said. All of it. The hallway creaked. Somewhere deep in the house, a door shut, a careful, measured sound that promised the storm was closer than we thought. The winter he had carried was breaking. The spring I'd kept hidden felt like a flood in my bones. And I understood with a clarity that shook me, claiming a wife wasn't about a ring or a room. It was about standing in the open together when the past dragged its knives into the present. The days after the hidden room discovery blurred into a tense rhythm, every moment thick with suspicion. William barely slept. I could hear him pacing the halls at night, his footsteps dragging like chains. During the day, he carried on with his CEO mask, immaculate suits, commanding presence, measured words. But behind closed doors, I saw the cracks widening. I saw the letters tucked into his desk drawer like talismans, and I saw the way he looked at me differently now, as though the ground beneath him had shifted, and I was the only thing keeping him upright. For me, the world had transformed too. I could no longer pretend I was just a forgotten wife locked away in a gilded cage. Those letters had handed me my father's ghost and my mother-in-law's faith, and I couldn't uncarry them. I had lived 3 years in silence, but silence no longer felt safe. It felt like betrayal. One morning over coffee, I dared to break it. "We can't keep waiting, William," I said quietly. "He knows we know. That shadow in the hallway, he won't stop." He lowered his newspaper, his blue eyes pinning me. "You think we can strike before he does?" I met his gaze without flinching. "I know we have to. My father deserves it. Your mother deserves it. We deserve it." For a long moment he said nothing. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. It wasn't warm, more like the grim twist of a soldier preparing for battle, but it was the first true acknowledgement I'd ever seen in his eyes. "Then we'll stop hiding." That night, he took me to a dinner. Not a glittering gala this time, but a small gathering of shareholders in a private room lined with mahogany and hushed ambition. For 3 years I had been excluded from everything. Now he brought me in openly, seated me beside him at the head of the table. The room went still as men and women, powerful and polished, whispered behind their wine glasses. "This is Emily." William announced, his hand firm on mine. "My wife, she will speak tonight." My blood ran cold. Speak, he hadn't warned me. But as the stares pressed into me, something in my chest surged forward. The years of silence rose like a tide, and when I opened my mouth, the words came steady. "My father died under circumstances that were called an accident," I said, my voice carrying across the table. "But I have reason to believe his death was orchestrated by greed. By the same greed that has been bleeding this company dry for years." Gasps, flared wine glasses clinked against wood. I felt my hands shake, but William squeezed them hard, steadying me. Gregory stood from his chair at the far end, his face pale but his smile sharp. "This is outrageous," he thundered. "We will not indulge the paranoid fantasies of a girl playing wife." "Then explain these," William cut in sliding copies of letters across the table. The shareholders leaned in, their faces tightening as they read the lines his mother had written. Lines that hinted at financial manipulation, at contracts twisted into snares. Gregory's eyes flickered just for a second, and I knew. I knew then that we had pierced his armor. He barked laughter to cover the slip, but the sound cracked at the edges. Letters from a dead woman, how convenient. And the word of a cleaning girl dressed in silk, how tragic. The humiliation was meant to burn me back into silence. Instead, it set me aflame. I rose from my seat, my voice breaking with fury. "For 3 years you all pretended I didn't exist. You laughed at me. You dismissed me. But I am standing here now because I refuse to be erased any longer. If you cannot stomach my truth, then you are accomplices to his lies." The room was dead silent. No one moved. For the first time in years, I felt taller than the marble walls around me. Later in the car, the silence between William and me was different again. Not cold, not charged, but reverent. Finally, he said, "You were extraordinary tonight." I looked at him, my throat thick. "I wasn't extraordinary. I was angry. I've been angry for 3 years. You just never let me use it." His lips parted like he wanted to argue, but then he nodded. "You're right. And I'll never make that mistake again." When we arrived home, the mansion was too quiet. As soon as we stepped inside, we saw it, a single envelope placed neatly on the grand piano in the foyer. No name, no seal, just paper waiting like a serpent coiled in the dark. William picked it up with steady hands, but when he read it, his knuckles whitened. He handed it to me without a word. The note was scrawled in red ink. "One wife doesn't make you untouchable. Be careful which ghosts you awaken." I stared at the words, my heart beat, a hammer in my chest. This wasn't just business anymore. It was war. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of the fight. I didn't sleep that night. The red ink from the note haunted me, burning behind my eyes every time I closed them. "Be careful which ghosts you awaken." It wasn't just a threat, it was a reminder that the past, my past, was being dragged into the present like a corpse pulled from shallow water. At dawn, I stood on the balcony staring at the gray sky. 3 years of silence had taught me how to bury pain. But now, it felt as if every wound I had hidden was demanding air. Behind me, I heard William's footsteps, softer than usual. He joined me without speaking, his hand brushing mine on the cold railing. For once, he didn't wear the armor of his suit, just a dark sweater, his hair mussed from restless hours. "We can't let him control the story," he said quietly. "That note means he knows we're building something stronger. He's trying to scare us back into hiding." I turned to him, my voice sharper than I expected. Then we won't hide. Not anymore. You've been carrying this war alone for too long, and I've been forced into silence. But if he killed my father, if he ruined your family, then it's ours now. Together. Something flickered in his eyes, something I hadn't seen in years. Hope, maybe. Or trust. He nodded almost like a vow. Later that day, we went through his father's study again. The letters were only fragments enough to rattle the shareholders, but not enough to finish Gregory. We needed proof undeniable and brutal. William pulled out files, ledgers, contracts, bank statements, but Gregory was meticulous. He buried his sins under layers of legality. As I sifted through the papers, my fingers paused on an old folder, dust coating its edges. Inside were invoices addressed to my father's company, marked with deadlines and impossible interest rates. My stomach twisted as I recognized his handwriting on the margins, pleas for extensions, desperate calculations of how to keep the business alive. And stapled to the back was a letter of refusal signed not by the bank but by Gregory himself. I pressed the paper to my chest, my body trembling. He didn't just bleed my father dry, I whispered. He made sure he couldn't climb out. William's jaw hardened. This is what we needed, a direct link. We take this to the board and he won't survive it. But as he spoke, I heard my mother's voice echo in memory. Not all battles are won in daylight. Some truths are too dangerous to shout before the world is ready. I folded the letter carefully. If we go too fast, he'll bury us before the board believes us. We need to be careful. William looked at me then, not as a wife, not as a duty, but as an equal. What do you suggest? The plan came slowly, but with every word it felt less like invention and more like destiny. We would gather allies quietly, seed doubt in Gregory's empire until the ground cracked beneath him. We would let his arrogance expose him. And when the time came, we would strike with everything: my father's letter, his mother's warnings, and the voices of every person Gregory had crushed along the way. That evening, as I walked through the mansion's empty halls, I caught my reflection in one of the gilded mirrors. For the first time, I didn't see a ghost. I saw a woman standing in the ruins of silence, ready to turn her grief into fire. But fate moves faster than plans. 2 nights later, William and I arrived at a charity dinner hosted by one of his closest allies. The ballroom glittered, chandeliers casting cruel light on every polished smile. As we entered, whispers followed, sharper, now more deliberate. I caught fragments: the forgotten wife, the maid in silk, Anderson's weakness. I thought I could endure it, but then I saw Gregory at the far end of the room, a glass of champagne in hand, his smirk carving through the crowd. And beside him stood a woman I hadn't seen in years, my father's former secretary. Her eyes met mine across the ballroom, full of something I couldn't name. Fear, regret, betrayal. Gregory raised his glass to me in a mock toast, his grin slicing through my chest. Then he leaned down and whispered something to the secretary, who immediately lowered her gaze. I knew then he wasn't done with us. He was already preparing his next move. I clenched William's hand so tightly he winced, but I didn't let go. My voice was a whisper, but it carried the force of a vow. He took my father. He won't take us. William looked at me, the weight of years of battles in his eyes, and for the first time he didn't answer with words. He kissed my hand in front of everyone, in front of Gregory, in front of the world. The ballroom gasped, cameras flashed, and I realized something undeniable. We weren't hiding anymore. And that meant the war had officially begun. The flashes from that night still burned in my mind days later. Every magazine, every business column, every gossip site had plastered the same image across their front pages: William Anderson, the untouchable CEO, kissing the hand of the wife he'd hidden for 3 years. To the world, it was a spectacle. To Gregory, it was provocation. And to me, it was the first time I felt like I existed not as a ghost in marble hallways, but as a woman who could no longer be erased. But with visibility came danger. Letters slipped under our door, anonymous calls that cut off when I answered, a bouquet of lilies delivered with no card, the kind you send to funerals. William's security team doubled, then tripled, but I could see the strain wearing on him. At night, when he thought I was asleep, he would sit at the edge of the bed, head in his hands, like a man trying to carry a crumbling world. One evening, after another day of silence and veiled threats, I couldn't stand it anymore. I slipped into his office where the lamplight pooled over papers and shadows. "You can't keep all of this inside," I told him. He looked up, his eyes rimmed with exhaustion. "If I open the door too wide, Emily, everything will fall out. And I don't know if I'll be able to put it back." I walked closer, my voice breaking but steady. "Then let it fall. We'll pick it up together." Something shifted then. For the first time, he didn't argue. He pulled me into his arms, holding me like I was both anchor and salvation. "I should have trusted you years ago," he whispered against my hair. The very next morning, we received an invitation to a shareholder meeting. Gregory's name was written boldly at the bottom. It was a challenge, plain and open. The kind you don't ignore. That night before the meeting, I found myself in my old room, the one I used to hide in when silence felt safest. I opened a drawer I hadn't touched in months, and found a photograph tucked beneath my scarves. My father standing outside his shop, pride etched into every line of his face. My throat tightened. I pressed the picture to my chest and whispered, "I'll finish this for you." The shareholder meeting was held in a sleek glass tower downtown. The room buzzed with tension, journalists crowding the back, cameras poised like weapons. William stood tall at the head, his presence commanding, while I sat beside him, hands folded in my lap but eyes unyielding. Gregory entered with his usual swagger, the kind of man who had spent decades convincing the world he was untouchable. He smiled at the board, at the cameras, even at me. But when his eyes met William's, I saw a flicker, just a flicker of unease. The meeting began with numbers, charts, financial forecasts. All rehearsed, all smoke and mirrors. Then William cleared his throat. "Before we continue, I'd like to address a matter of integrity, a matter of survival for this company." Every camera turned, every pen hovered. He gestured to me. "My wife has something to say." Gasps echoed. Whispers rippled. My pulse thundered in my ears, but I rose, holding my father's letter in one trembling hand. "My name is Emily Anderson." I began, my voice clear, though my knees shook. 3 years ago, I married into this family and was told to stay silent. Today I will not. I laid the documents on the table, the paper sharp against the polished wood. These records prove that Gregory Anderson systematically destroyed my father's business with predatory contracts. He didn't stop there. He has been manipulating assets, bleeding this company while hiding behind William's face. The room erupted. Shareholders demanded answers, journalists shouted questions, and Gregory slammed his fist against the table. "Lies," he roared, the ramblings of a bitter girl playing at power. But William slid another set of documents forward, bank transfers, contracts, the very proof we'd dug out of the hidden files. "They're not her lies," he said coldly. "They're your signature." For the first time, Gregory faltered. His face drained of color, sweat beading his forehead. He tried to speak, but the words choked in his throat. The board turned. Cameras flashed. In that moment, the empire he had built on deceit began to crack. But even as victory burned in my chest, I felt a chill. Because men like Gregory don't fall quietly. They drag others down with them. And I knew deep in my bones this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of the reckoning. The boardroom was chaos, voices rising, cameras flashing, accusations slicing the air like blades. Some shareholders demanded Gregory's immediate removal, others muttered about damage control, while the journalists at the back scribbled furiously, their pens hungry for blood. I stood there trembling, clutching the letter like it was both shield and weapon, my father's ghost whispering through every stroke of his handwriting. Gregory tried to recover, straightening his tie, his smile strained but sharp. "Do you really think anyone will believe the word of a maid over mine?" His eyes glittered as he leaned closer across the polished table. "You've been invisible for 3 years, Emily, and invisibility doesn't turn into power overnight." I wanted to flinch. I wanted to fold. But William's hand found mine beneath the table, steady and grounding. I lifted my chin. "You're right. I was invisible. But the moment you tried to erase me, you gave me the very thing that makes me powerful: truth. And truth doesn't need permission to exist." The room went silent, the weight of my words hanging heavy. Gregory's face darkened, his mask cracking under the pressure. For the first time I saw fear. The chairman of the board cleared his throat. "We'll convene an investigation immediately. Until then, Gregory Anderson, you are suspended from your duties." Gregory slammed his fist on the table, the sound echoing like a gunshot. "You'll regret this, all of you." His gaze snapped to me, burning with venom. "Especially you." Security escorted him out, but even as the doors closed behind him, I couldn't shake the chill his words left behind. It wasn't just a threat, it was a promise. That night, the mansion was quieter than ever. William poured 2 glasses of whiskey in his office, sliding one to me. "You were extraordinary today," he said softly, studying me with an intensity that made my breath catch. "You didn't just speak, you changed the room." I sipped the burn in my throat, steadying me. "I don't feel extraordinary, I feel terrified." "So do I," he admitted. "But for the first time in years, I don't feel alone in it." We sat in silence after that, the kind of silence that wasn't empty, but full of unspoken apologies, of questions about what we could have been if 3 years hadn't been stolen from us, of fragile hope for what might still be possible. But just as the moment began to soften, the phone on his desk rang. He picked it up, his face tightening. What he barked then froze. His eyes darted to mine. "Where?" He slammed the receiver down, his jaw clenched. "There was an accident. A car crashed near the company's downtown building. The driver was Gregory." My heart lurched. "He's alive," William said grimly, "but badly hurt. The police think it was deliberate. He wasn't alone." Cold washed through me. "Who was with him?" William hesitated, then whispered, "Your father's former secretary." The room spun. That woman I'd seen at the gala, the one who lowered her eyes when Gregory whispered in her ear, she was tied to all of this. And now, with her silenced in a hospital bed, the truth she carried might die with her. I pressed a hand to my mouth. "He's tying up loose ends." William's eyes met mine, steady and unflinching. "Then we have to be faster than him." I thought of my father's smile in that photograph, of the letters his mother had written, of 3 years spent erased and voiceless. I thought of Gregory's words, "especially you." And in that moment, terror gave way to something fiercer. I set my glass down, my hands no longer trembling. "Then let's end this, once and for all." William nodded, and in his gaze I saw not just a partner in battle, but the man who for the first time truly saw me. The storm was no longer coming, it was here, and I was ready to face it. The night before we moved against Gregory felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. I lay awake in our bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the storm rattling against the mansion's windows. William sat at his desk across the room, papers and files spread out before him like battle plans. Neither of us spoke much. Words felt too fragile to carry the weight of what we were about to do. By morning, the world outside looked freshly washed, but the air inside was heavy with dread. William clasped my hand as we drove downtown, his grip firm but trembling. For the first time, I didn't see him as untouchable. He was a man at war with his family, with his past, with himself. And somehow he had chosen me to stand beside him. The shareholder assembly hall was packed. Reporters lined the back wall, cameras flashing like lightning. Everyone knew this meeting would either save the Anderson empire or bury it. Gregory arrived late, leaning on a cane, his face pale but his eyes burning with fury. The sight of him alive, still standing after everything he had done, made my stomach knot. He looked at me the way a predator looks at prey, patient, calculating, certain of his victory. William opened the session with a voice like steel. "For too long, corruption has been allowed to fester in this company. Today the truth comes to light." He gestured to me, and for the second time in weeks, I stood before the world. I held up the letter, my father's handwriting trembling in my hands. "My father died under what was called an accident." I began, my voice steady though my heart raced. "But this letter and the contracts attached to it prove that Gregory Anderson forced him into a corner with debts he could never repay. This wasn't business. It was betrayal." Gasps erupted. Cameras clicked like gunfire. Gregory laughed, a sound so cold it silenced the room. A grieving daughter spinning fairy tales, he sneered. "Pathetic, desperate. Do you think anyone will destroy decades of my work for your theatrics?" William's hand slid another file across the table. "Then explain these." Inside were bank records, transfers funneled into offshore accounts, kickbacks disguised as consulting fees, signatures in Gregory's own handwriting. The evidence was damning. Even the shareholders who had once fawned over him leaned back, their faces pale. For the first time, Gregory faltered. His cane wobbled, His smirk cracked. He pointed a shaking finger at me. "This is your doing," he spat. "3 years invisible and now you ruin everything. You should have stayed silent." The words sliced through me like glass, but I didn't flinch. Not this time. 3 years of silence was your weapon, I said, my voice rising, but it became my strength. You tried to erase me, but erasure only made me louder. The board chairman stood. "We've heard enough. Gregory Anderson, by unanimous vote, you are hereby removed from Anderson Enterprises." The gavel struck the table like thunder. Gregory roared, lunging forward, but security caught him before he could reach me. His face twisted with rage, spit flying as he screamed, "This isn't over. You'll regret this day for the rest of your life." As they dragged him out, the cameras followed the world watching the mighty fall. I stood there trembling, tears stinging my eyes, but inside me, something unbroken finally stirred. For the first time since my father's death, I felt justice. Later, in the quiet of William's office, we sat across from each other, the storm outside echoing the one we had survived. He poured 2 glasses of wine, sliding one to me. His eyes, usually so guarded, were soft now. "Emily," he said quietly, "you saved me. You saved us." I shook my head, tears spilling freely. "We saved each other." He reached across the desk, taking my hand. For the first time in 3 years, his touch wasn't duty or pretense, it was a vow. No more silence, not between us, not ever again. And in that moment I believed him, because love wasn't born in the easy days. It was forged in the fire of betrayal, in the ashes of loss, in the courage to stand even when the world tried to erase you. I had been invisible. Now I was unshakable. So if you've ever felt small, unseen, or silenced, remember this. Sometimes the very thing meant to break you becomes the reason you rise. Thank you for walking through my story with me. If it touched you, please like, share, subscribe, and leave a comment about the battles you've faced and overcome. Your voice matters, never let anyone silence it.